You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Today is Monday, May 3rd, 2021, and this is your daily Star Trek news from the Roddenberry Podcast Network. On today's show, author of The God Equation, physicist Michio Kaku, reveals to LeVar Burton that he's a lifelong Trekkie. Composer Jeff Russo thinks Star Trek fans would have loved Noah Hawley's now defunct film script. And Star Trek guest actor Nathan Jung has passed away at 74. I'm Alison Pitt, and today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month of counseling by visiting betterhelp.com/DSTN. First up today, last week we told you about a special virtual conversation happening between Star Trek The Next Generation actor LeVar Burton and noted physicist Michio Kaku at the 2021 Chicago Humanities Festival. During the event, the pair discussed Kaku's latest book, The God Equation, The Quest for a Theory of Everything, among other topics spanning pretty much the breadth of the universe. When it comes to Star Trek, both men agree that the worlds of science and science fiction are definitely related, with Star Trek inspiring the scientists and engineers of tomorrow. Posing a scenario in which Captain Kirk flipped open his hip-mounted communicator to call the Enterprise, Burton suggested that someone somewhere was inspired. Continuing, Burton said, "That child probably grew up and became an engineer, a scientist, a designer of product, and is responsible for a piece of technology that's more common on this planet than a toaster, well, at least it has been in the past. That's a flip cell phone." Now, Burton's scenario isn't far-fetched. As it turns out, Kaku is a lifelong Trekkie. During their conversation, Kaku admitted that he, too, was inspired by science fiction as a child. "I was hooked," Kaku told Burton. "I mean, what's there not to love? Space monsters, ray guns, invisibility shields, underwater cities. I was hooked." Kaku described how he was curious about things like warp drive, the fourth dimension, and hyperspace as a child. That curiosity drove him to become a physicist, seeking an understanding of the ideas that fascinated him when he was young. To read Dr. Michio Kaku's latest book, The God Equation, The Quest for a Theory of Everything, you can visit bookshop.org, Amazon.com, or wherever you get your books. Now, next up, while we wait for details about the Star Trek feature film currently penciled in for a June 2023 release, franchise composer Jeff Russo has chimed in with a few thoughts about his friend Noah Hawley's now dormant film that Paramount Pictures veered away from last fall. In an interview with TrekMovie.com, Russo said he and Hawley had already had extensive conversations about the film, and while Russo had not seen any of the pre-production work, he had read the script and even started work on some musical themes for the movie. And in his words, what he read would have made Star Trek fans lose their minds. It would have been telling a story that they hadn't heard, that hadn't been done, in a way that would have been very fulfilling, Russo continued, finding out answers to questions that have never been answered. Official details on Hawley's story were never made public, save a piece in Deadline last August that said it might have been about a deadly virus. In any case, Russo's comments about questions that have never been answered seem to indicate it spoke to the larger Star Trek mythology in a way that would have resonated with longtime fans of the franchise. And according to Russo, it's a story that could still be told as a standalone film within the larger scope of what Star Trek is doing theatrically. It stands totally on its own. It's one of those stories where, yeah, they can drop right into the middle of the whole thing. It could work if they just made one and never go back to it, and it would be totally fine. Even if Hawley's script never does see the light of day, Russo also shared with Trek Movie that the musical themes he developed could still be repurposed in his score for the upcoming 4th season of Star Trek Discovery. To read a transcript of Russo's conversation with Trek Movie, or to listen to the interview on their all-access podcast, visit trekmovie.com. Now, I've got more news in a moment, but first, a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. So, you and I have never met. Well, some of you I've met, but you catch my drift. My point is, I don't necessarily know what's good for you any more than you can know what's good for me. But if you're feeling like maybe you could use someone to talk to, BetterHelp does actually know what's good for you. When you sign up with BetterHelp, they'll ask you about you, and they use what you tell them to match you with a licensed professional therapist who specializes in what you need. Anxiety, self-esteem, grief, these are just some of the areas that BetterHelp counselors specialize in, and they can use their skills to help you. In the meantime, I just do the Star Trek news. I want you to start living a happier life today. And as a daily Star Trek news listener, you can get 10% off your first month of counseling by visiting betterhelp.com/DSTN. Join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/DSTN. Now, finally today, Star Trek, the original series guest actor Nathan Jung has died at the age of 74. According to a piece in Variety, Jung's close personal friend and attorney, Timothy Tao, confirmed Jung's death on April 24th. No cause of death was disclosed. The Star Trek, the original series episode, The Savage Curtain, was one of Jung's first on-screen credits as Genghis Khan. In that episode, he was teamed up with Kales and other notorious villains from history in an unlikely battle against Abraham Lincoln, Surak, Captain Kirk, and Mr. Spock. Although his character never spoke, Jung's menacing presence as Genghis Khan established himself as a part of Star Trek history. He was active on the convention circuit, even as recently as last December, appearing at a GalaxyCon Live event for guests of Star Trek. Now, his appearance on Star Trek led to a number of guest starring roles on classic television shows, including MASH, Starsky and Hutch, and Chips. He also appeared in such well-known films as Big Trouble in Little China, Black Rain, and Beverly Hills Ninja. Jung's most recent on-screen appearance was in the documentary short Nathan Jung vs. Bruce Lee, in which he shared his experience meeting the famed kung fu expert while working on an episode of the 1960s TV series, Here Come the Brides. Nathan Jung is survived by his nephew Keith Jung. Please join me in sending condolences to his family. Well, that's it for today's daily Star Trek news from the Roddenberry Podcast Network. Don't forget to check out the other great shows on the network at podcasts.roddenberry.com. Daily Star Trek News is produced by me, Alison Pitt, and written by Chris Peterson and Jack Brown. Today's show was sponsored by BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month of counseling by visiting betterhelp.com/DSTN. I'm back tomorrow with more of the Star Trek news you need to know and this week's Trek Trivia. I'm Alison Pitt. Live long and prosper.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.